although it didn't end the way I wanted it to, I ended up, when I got to Atlanta, I ended up going back into the workforce. But for those 2 years, I had made so many connections. So again, I was going from Atlanta to Miami to New York to to Vegas. I was doing that music wise, and I was bouncing around, getting into sessions, trying to meet with execs, so on and so forth, to kind of like show my worth and to find whoever wanted to have a producer on their project. And that just really showed me like the amount of hustle you had to have in this industry.
Welcome to the Relocate Podcast. This is Kirsten, your favorite podcast host. And with us today is a good friend of mine who is very near and dear to my heart. I say that in every episode, but not for real. Like, Dante is very near and dear to my heart. My gosh, I said your name before even introducing it. It's okay, y'all, because today we have Dante. Dante is in Atlanta. He's lived there for a little over 6 years, and he's gonna give us a good story about his adventures and his experience with just relocating. Atlanta is not the only place he's been, but he's been there for long enough to give us the rip on how it is like to live in Atlanta. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Dante.
Yes. Thank you for having me, KB. Like, I'm excited. I know when we had initially talked about this, you know, like through text, all the emojis and whatnot had come through. So I'm glad that we're finally able to connect on this. Looking forward to this. I'm proud of you for getting this up and running. And so I'm equally as excited that you asked me to join. So I'm ready.
Me too. Yay. So, when I first asked you to be a part of this podcast, I knew you lived in Texas, and I assumed that you were from Texas. But please tell the people where you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, let me ask you, do you want the long story or do you want the short story?
Okay, you can give us the long story.
Okay, cool.
Give us the long
So the
story.
long story, so I will kick this off. So I am by way of Texas. I claim Texas, Dallas in particular. Growing up, I was in the military, or my parents were in the military. Let me start there. So I grew up very quickly, or for a short amount of time, in Ohio, in a very small town in Ohio. For those of you who don't know, it's called Lima, Lima. It's close to Dayton, Ohio, or the bigger city, Columbus. So I grew up in that small town until about 7-ish, 8-ish. And then my mother and I, we relocated to Dallas. I did the rest of school in Dallas. I went to college in Texas. So I claim Texas. But of course, I've been all over with my parents being in the military as well. Very, very short lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then after Texas, I had gone to Florida and then Atlanta now. So
Let me tell you a story. I'm ready for the story. Like,
yeah,
the
let me know.
moment you said Ohio, it made me think about my time in South Carolina. No, so living in the Charleston area, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden there was just an influx of people from Ohio moving to South Carolina, particularly like that area,
Hmm.
Charleston, uh, the beach, like beachy type areas. You know how people in Texas feel about folks who move from California to Texas?
Absolutely.
That's how people were feeling about the folks from Ohio moving to South Carolina. And it was crazy that there was a parody like article floating around,
Hmm.
and over 40,000 people signed from South Carolina signed a petition to make people from Ohio move back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when you said Ohio, I'm
Wow.
like, dang, you
Yeah.
too, bro? You too?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. I know it's funny because unless unless like family and whatnot, you won't know where that's at. And so I really don't share that because it was such a short time. And truthfully, like I spent majority of my time in Texas, so I rep Texas. But if you had to ask me where some of my family was and where I grew up, I can't deny that. So I say Ohio, but by way of Texas because that's where I grew up in.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about Texas.
Cool.
Yeehaw, Texas.
No,
How
no, you're not.
fitting.
Okay, okay. All right, all right. I don't have any cowboy hats on this end though, so and I don't own any boots anymore. Yeah, so I'm a reformed Texan, if that's what I want to call it right now. I used to be a lot deeper into the Texas mix, but since leaving, I've had to pull back a little bit. But let's talk about it. I know you have some juicy details you want to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you moved to Texas around about 7, 8 years
Hmm.
old, and
Hmm.
you said that you have family who are your parents maybe were in the military.
Correct. Yes, my mother and my father.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. They relocated to Dallas.
No, so they met in the military. They were
Okay.
stationed in Germany. So that's actually where I was born. So,
That's
right,
neat.
right. You're getting the tidbits, I know, right. And so after Germany, my mother had decided that she no longer wanted to be in the army. And so when they were given orders, they had relocated back to a base in Colorado Springs, which is where we had been stationed, very short amount of time. However, unfortunately, during that time in Colorado Springs, my mother and my father had filed for divorce. And so my dad had then shifted back home to Florida, and my mother had shifted back home to Ohio, which is why I state, Ohio is a part of me, but I don't claim it or more so claim Texas. So when we moved to Texas, it was just my mother and I, and we were gracious enough to join my aunt and my cousin who were already living there at the time, and they allowed us to get settled and kind of build back up before we then got settled in a new place and planted roots in Texas.
Okay. Okay. There you go. Because I'm sitting here thinking, what type of military base is near Dallas? Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so no bases in Dallas that I'm aware of. Believe they're not in Dallas unless they're reserved. The main one that I know about is in Killeen, Fort Hood. So I think everyone who's military adjacent will know about that one. But any other particular ones, there are a few in San Antonio as well. Brooks Army Base, I believe, and another one for the Air Force. But anything besides that, I'm not really too versed in. So I can tell you if there is a installation in Dallas.
Gotcha. Okay. So, what was it like growing up in Dallas? I can imagine that Lima was pretty small, kind of like maybe country, maybe?
Yes. So Ohio was definitely night and day when it comes to Texas. So Dallas, very big population. It's a metroplex. International airport, home of Love. Southwest, Love Field, all of that. Ohio town, I think maybe 200,000 people maybe were there, and I'm guesstimating on that. And 200,000 is the smaller cities in Texas or in Dallas in the region. So some of the suburbs like Garland, Richardson, so on and so forth, they may house 200,000, 250,000 plus. Moving to Texas and more so Dallas was a not a culture shock, but it really allowed me to really experience like the fast life and the city life that I didn't get growing up or starting to grow up in Ohio. I would tell you this, Dallas, I loved it. Like I would not change it for anything. If I had to go back in time, I would do it again over and over and over. It really set me up for success in my life in terms of the city life and bouncing to other cities as I did when I grew older and I moved around. And so I think that was really the catalyst for me in terms of like really understanding and how to navigate like big cities without becoming like nervous or scared to maneuver. Because when you travel around, you travel to all the big cities. And if you're not a big city person, it can be overwhelming. So I feel like Dallas helped me in terms of keeping my anxiety at a low when I went to other big cities for travel, for work, personal, whatever the case was. And so yeah, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Can you elaborate on what exactly it was that you loved about living in Dallas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me in general, Dallas was just like it was like a melting pot. So Texas, of all cultures and whatnot, and I really didn't have that in Ohio, or I really didn't notice that. Ohio was more so just small town folk and whatnot. So you would have a few different type of backgrounds in Lima that I was accustomed to. But once we got to Texas and Dallas, a lot of the Latino, a lot of the Black, a lot of the Caribbean, um, a lot of the other like I'm trying to think. Like I knew a lot of Italians, a lot of English from like the UK, Scots as well, which was wild. It was just a melting pot, yeah. So it was a lot of people that I may not have ever, interacted with had I stayed in a smaller place. And so that helped me really kind of like open my eyes in terms of like the world and culture and just understanding everyone's like journey and path in life in terms of when it came to like understanding, I guess, in a sense, being open-minded to things, I guess, like never closed off and learning that and being able to take in that. I don't think I would have gotten that if I wasn't in Dallas. But besides that part, again, the big city, there was always something to do. Like we always had like teen nights and stuff. Skating was a big thing that I did in Ohio. And so in Texas, they had a lot of the skating rinks, whatnot, that you go to, teen nights, so on and so forth. The football games, Texas is big on football, very big. You know this already. And so football was like a religion, and so Friday nights, you're outside, you're at the games, so on and so forth. It was always a moment. And I'll give you another tidbit. I was in the drum line during high school. And so I was always traveling for the games and whatnot. So yeah, so obviously not only getting to play in the games, but watching the games, it was very like I was always in the mix of things. And that lifestyle, being around, being able to travel from Dallas to Houston to San Antonio to Austin and whatnot, it was there was always something to do and I never have to worry about being bored. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. There were also pockets in Dallas, such as Deep Ellum, which has been revitalized now, but that was a lot of the live band scene back when I was growing up. And so you would go out there, go see bands, walk around, very eclectic group of individuals. And then the nightlife scene that we had, it was just they don't do it anymore now. Like you remember, it was a lot of dancing back then. Like people don't really dance now, but back then, very much so, just dancing floors, this and that, and the venues were like three, four, five different levels, and so
Wow.
you were in there from when it opened, maybe like 10:30 to about 3 or 4 a.m. just dancing the night away. And so there was always something to do. You always had fun. There was never any quote unquote downtime. There was always something for if you weren't a clubber, you could go and do something. There was something for everyone. And that's what I really enjoyed.
Wait, how long ago was this where Deep Ellum was like that?
Yeah. So I left Dallas for San Antonio where I went to school in 2007.
Okay.
So yeah, so around 2007, I would say Deep Ellum was about that. It started revitalizing probably around 2005, but it really didn't pick up till maybe like 2010, 2011. And they, I don't want to call it gentrified, but essentially they made it nicer for out of towners and clean up the crime and so on and so forth. So essentially gentrification, but we'll put a nicer bow on it.
Yeah, because I mean, the way that you're describing Dallas reminds me of Austin.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are some nice kind of similarities to that. Deep Ellum area is I would say, West 6th and 6th Street, East 6th. Is that how that feels? Absolutely, 100%.
I hate that it lost that feel. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
my
yeah.
goodness. It
It's
seems,
okay. I mean, it's still a part of the history out there. It is different, but you know, it I guess being selfish, it was there when I needed it, and so it did its job.
yeah,
Unfortunately, the kids now they won't be able to experience it in that light, but I'm sure they'll get their experiences as it stands now, and they'll be able to reflect back later and be like, "Hey, it did what it needed to do."
yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm just sitting here thinking, like, Dallas is one of those cities where it's like, oh, okay, what else is there? Oh, nothing. Okay. I guess I'll leave now. That's how I feel about it. Like, okay. It's like that Waka Flocka like image that goes around where he's just like rolling his eyes. He's just like, okay.
I guess it's like that now, but you had to be there during the quote unquote golden years. So, because I mean, it was home of D Town Boogie and all of that, and when I was growing up, that was like huge. So all the college music from 2008 to maybe 2012, 2013, a lot of that had kind of derived from Dallas, and then from there, people had taken the style and made it their own, and they came from different other different places because I mean, we had a lot of like the D Town Boogie and stuff like that. And then we had other artists from Houston, who started making their own. And then everything between Dallas and Houston really made the soundtracks for a lot of collegiate students from that time frame to where every party, I gotta go to a party. Like I have to be there. And then slowly but surely that music started spreading out up to Louisiana and New Mexico. So yeah, it was a time. Absolutely, it was a time. Rest in peace, B King.
Right. So sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sad. I think, yeah, that crazy. The man just passed like that. I think you and gosh, what's his name? Introduced me to Beat King. Y'all went to the same school, I think.
I see, because there was a lot of folks at the schools.
He's a DJ. What's his name? Or not a DJ, but he's a producer now. Like Godwin.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
introduced me to Beat King. I was like, oh,
yeah.
this is fire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you was in Dallas for a little minute or whatever, then you made your way to San Antonio for school. Just for school,
Yep.
right?
Yep. San Antonio, yeah, home of UTSA or University of Texas at San Antonio.
Okay.
2007 to 2011. What a time. What a time.
That's a part of the University of Texas system,
It
right?
is. Yeah, it
Okay.
is part of the system. Yeah.
Okay. And what was that experience like?
Turned up. It's crazy. I think about it. Obviously, everybody who has gone to school or for college or post grade school, they all have different experiences. So you have yours, and so you can remember back and how exciting that was for you. For UTSA, we didn't get a football team until my senior year, so until 2011 when we had our football team in their inaugural season. And we still play at the Alamo Dome out there, but we were a part of, I want to say, I think it was the SWAC. I think it was. I don't know. Forgive me if I'm misquoting that. I don't think it was actually. Now I'm thinking about it. Anyway, we're now part of Conference USA. But having that and or having that in 2011, we didn't have the normal college life that others who had football teams do. To where they go to the games. They're just like, hey, it's a tradition. Every Saturday we're here. So we had the basketball games, but we also had a very, very close knit college community. So before I hop into the school piece, just sharing a little bit of information with you. So UTSA started as a kind of like a commuter satellite campus.
Okay.
So it was set up, and a lot of professionals had gone to UTSA to get like certificates or post degrees and whatnot, before they started building, housing facilities and so on and so forth, and really renovating UTSA to what it is today. And so, because of that, we were still considered, quote unquote, like a commuter school, but we did have a few dorms or living facilities on site. And so everybody who lived on campus, it was really like a family. And so the community, wherever you fit inside of the school, wherever if it was SGA, if it was the sports folks, if it was like the gym heads, if it was really like the super um, creative folks, because there was creative folks all around, like singers, dancers, musicians, so on and so forth, everybody in between, like we were all interconnected. And so when I got to school, that opened my eyes. I'd only seen this in TV shows and in movies and whatnot. And I really didn't understand what college life would entail. So getting to school, living at the only official dorm, because everything else was like apartment style base. And so the only official
Okay.
dorm on campus, I lived there for all 4 of my years. I ended up actually working there after my freshman year, but I'll jump into that here in a second. Living there and really getting immersed into it. Yeah, I was everywhere outside all the time, going to all the events, all the parties from the Greeks, all the parties from the just other events. We had our events board. They would bring comedians and concerts onto campus, and it really just was immersive. Not only that, but then the basketball team as well. We had, unofficially the bird's nest on campus as well, because we were the road runners. And so we would go to the basketball games in lieu of the football games, since we didn't have a team. And so everybody was turned up at the games. When we won, we're outside at any little bar that's around, whatever the case is. It was just a time, it was a time. The parties were fantastic, and again, just college life as a whole, that type of freedom, like I really didn't understand what that looked like. But once I was able to like let my wings like loose and just have fun, it was a fantastic time. There were no bad grades, so I want to just put that out here now. Like I still
Love
got my
that
work
for
done.
you.
I still got my work done. I was a party person as well, but I also too, in high school, I really picked up on music. So I was one of the creatives. Obviously, like I mentioned before, I was in the band, I was in drumline, so on and so forth. But before I left high school, I started working on producing music. So when I got to college, I was really like in the weeds of producing music, working with a lot of the university artists who I had met and networked with. And so even though I was outside, I was also always in my dorm when I wasn't working on like assignments and I wasn't out partying. I was in there just day in and day out, just working till late hours, creating music to be able to showcase around the university and whatnot. So I feel like that my experience, and of course I'm biased, but I feel like my experience as well. I had the best experience that I think when you hear about people going to college and living those 4 years, and someone's like, "Yo, you had the best experience that you could ever had." I like my experience of that. Like, there's no way you would go back. I wouldn't change anything. I would not do anything differently. Everything that was done was how it was supposed to be to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I failed to mention to the masses that that Dante has been like in the music industry for decades. Well, not like, he's not old. I mean, don't let the pepper beard like fool you. He's been in the game for a minute, but he's not old. He's been in there for a few decades, but he ain't old.
Gonna
Yeah.
say it's funny, not to cut you off, because it has been decades actually. Like next May, it'll be what 20 years. So yeah, it'll be 20 years because I started in 2005. And so, 15, I made it 10 in 2025, make it 20. And so it's been a journey, we can talk about that more later on, but yeah, decades for sure. Like yeah, absolutely. So that was a part of my college experience as well. I became known as one of the music guys on campus, and I actually, for a short period of time, transitioned into a DJ as well. I didn't do it too much just because the equipment and everything, it was just during that time frame, it was a lot of like, I really don't want to lug all this equipment around, whatnot. I actually didn't have a car for college. And so getting around places and whatnot, I would always have to ask for, rides and whatnot. And I was just like, I'll let this go. But the production side of things, yeah, that was my bread and butter. Like, that was like, if you can ask anybody on campus, this was the music guy, like when he wasn't outside having fun, on the actual campus grounds, he was working, producing, whatever the case is, networking, all of it.
So, would you say that college played or laid the foundation for how like your life would have been, how your life is like now?
I would say, yeah, I would say college definitely laid the foundation. I mean, of course, the network and the connections that you make in college, you can either use them or you can lose them, and in all facets, we will keep some and we grow apart from others. That's just the way of life in general. But I will say that the connections that I made in college have come back in later years to help me out when things were needed. I would call in favors, people would call in favors, so on and so forth. And that would not have happened had it not been for college, had it not been for interacting and creating those memories and bonds with those individuals. I wouldn't have been able to, for example, I'll give you one right now. When I actually got to Florida, I had actually called in a favor for a friend to stay in Miami because I was doing a competition. I hadn't talked to this person in maybe 2 or 3 years, but I connected and I was just like, hey, do you mind if I'm driving down? I have this competition, whatnot. This is something that helped me push my career to the next level in terms of music. It's like, absolutely. I hadn't seen you in 3 years. Come on, come over. So it was actually, it turned into a weekend thing. And I was just grateful of that, being able to rely on those connections and those just bonds in times of needs. And people have done it with me as well. They've called me, hey, I know you're in Atlanta. Do you mind if I stay with you, whatnot? Absolutely. I got a room for you. Come on through. This and that, so on and so forth. So yeah, college had absolutely helped me in terms of setting my life up the way it is now.
Okay. 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 Is there anything, because I know you don't live in San Antonio or don't even really live in Texas anymore, but is there anything that you miss about living in either San Antonio or in Dallas?
Yeah, I would say for sure the food, first and
Okay.
foremost. So San Antonio, uh, the Mexican and the Latin cuisine, excuse me, the Latin cuisine out there, fantastic. Like I was a big proponent of breakfast tacos during college.
Oh, I just had some today.
Look, and every time I hear someone in Texas and they say they had it, I'm so jealous
Sorry.
because breakfast tacos in Texas are not like any other breakfast tacos in the world. I know people do breakfast tacos in California and they say that theirs is the best, and that's to be determined. I've had them there. They're good, but I'm biased. And so breakfast tacos in Texas are top notch. I miss that so much in terms of like that. And I miss the barbecue. Texas barbecue is fantastic. Everybody has barbecue as well. Other places, I know a few friends of mine, they rave about, Kansas City barbecue or barbecue in the Midwest in general. Not your face. And then there's others who, who rave about barbecue on the East Coast and whatnot, and the barbecue on the West Side. So everybody has their go-to and their favorites. But being a Texas boy, the barbecue is just fantastic. Like the brisket sandwiches, the brisket tacos. I think it's a new thing now, but birria and whatnot, birria, however you pronounce it. I know there are different ways people will pronounce it. Things like that, and it was always so cheap and affordable. So affordable tacos, affordable just stand food. It was fantastic. As a college kid growing up, and then even going back now, I always when I get some, it's just like it's a reminder to me of of home and second homes and just being out there. So that, and then friends and family who still live there. Like I don't get to see people as much being out of the state now, and so when I'm able to travel back in and connect with folks who I went to school with, it's always a pleasure and it's always good vibe and love. And so I will say, not being able to connect with some of my closer friends enough or as I would like to, I get homesick with that. So those are things that I do miss. And then my mother's in Dallas. And so, like not being able to see her as much as I would like to, those are things that's just like I would love to be able to do that more. But as life, as you move around, it's part of life. And so there are no regrets on this end. And when I'm able to make it back, absolutely, I'm on a plane. I'm out there. So it's all good.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Florida now because I think for a minute there, well, actually, yeah, because when Clemson played Alabama, you were living in Tampa, right?
Yes, I believe so. When was that?
2000, I should know. I was at the game. In 16 at least?
Yeah, I was in
Yeah.
Tampa. Yeah, 2016, I was in Tampa. Yep.
Okay. What led you to Tampa?
Yeah. So funny enough, Tampa was actually like a double whammy in a good way. So in San Antonio, after I graduated from college, I started working for the banking industry. And so I was working for Wells Fargo for some time before they had shut down my department. When they had shut down my department, I was fortunate enough to get another position with Chase that was right across the street. So I was working for Chase for, I want to say for about 2 years. I think I kicked off like January 2013. So just slightly under 2 years. And then November 2014, we had got word that our department was also shutting down. So we had 3 locations that we could go to. Right. We could go to Manhattan, New York. We could go to, I think it was Wilmington, Delaware, or we can go to Tampa, Florida. Now, for me, I had to make a decision for 2. I wasn't going to Delaware. So Delaware was out the question. There was nothing to do in Delaware. I had already looked it up. I had already talked to folks who I knew who was around that. There was nothing out there besides industry, like banking industry. And so I knew as a young man, I didn't want to go out there. I felt like there would be nothing to do. And I would always be on the train to somewhere like DC or New York or whatnot. When it had come to Manhattan, I had actually, funny enough, I think fear had gotten the best of me with that. New York was such an intimidating place. And you always heard about the stories. And I think before then, I hadn't been to New York. And so to move up to New York was such a nerve-wracking or anxiety inducing kind of thought process because you always hear about it. It's fast. You have to you got to get with the bustle or you're not going to make it. And for me, being out there and knowing how expensive it was, I felt like that probably at the time would not be a smart investment, you know. And so that had left me with the other option. And when I say double whammy, it was because I would be able to move to a place to where I could flourish. It's hot, it's nice, sunny. I know Tampa because my family was there. And so that was the second part of it. Being in Tampa, would allow me to be closer to my dad's side of the family, which I really hadn't had a big chance to kind of like, experience. And so this had set me up for like a no-brainer in my eyes at the time of like, hey, I'm going to Tampa. I get to be with my family and build with my dad's side of the family, and I get to advance my career in terms of working in the banking industry. Because at the time, I was working anti money laundering and financial crimes, anti money laundering. Yeah, so it was a growing piece in there, in terms of like jumping into that field and really being like an investigator. And at the time, I was such a big fan of it, and so it was again rambling aside. It was a no brainer. Told myself, hey, let's go to Tampa. Let's get to it. We know that this department is going to be a set. They had just put up the building, so there was nothing going on, and so I went out there, and that's how I started my journey in Tampa.
Okay, there we go. Because now I'm sitting here thinking, when I met you,
Mhm.
like I didn't get to really see or get into the weeds with the banking side of Dante. I knew the music side of Dante. I knew the creative side and the artistic side. In my mind, I was thinking like this was something that was like preference over banking. So now was banking over preference? I mean, over music?
Music was definitely over banking. So
Okay.
banking was the way to make money and to continue to have a roof over my head. The move to Tampa, even with it being for to continue the money flow and to also be close to family, it was also a place of you're 4 hours away from Miami, which is a big music place. You're 6 hours away from Atlanta, which is also a big music place. So I was in the middle of those places so I could catch a quick flight to Atlanta or drive, and I could catch a quick flight to Miami or drive. And for me, that was the catalyst as well. Is like, hey, you're not going to be in New York, which New York is a music place as well. But between Miami and Atlanta, and what you want to do in music, Atlanta would be good. And Miami, this was the time where a lot of things were popping off for Miami as well. Like DJ Khaled was out there, of course. A lot of that, a lot of the southern music was starting to pick up from Atlanta and Miami, and so it made sense to be in those spaces to where they had the baton. New York is always going to be known as a music headquarters. That's not going anywhere. But at the time, New York didn't have the baton. Atlanta and Miami did. And so I had made a strategic move to be where the baton was, to get the most out of that experience and to be where the movers and shakers were. So that was why I had picked Tampa, in addition to the other two former reasons, but more so it was a strategic place because of how close I was to both cities.
Okay. I didn't know that about Miami. Had no idea. And how long were you in Tampa?
So I was in Tampa for about 4 years. I moved to Tampa November 2020, excuse me, November 2014. And then I stayed out there till about October 2018 before moving to Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was out there for a pretty good time. And when I was on the ground in Tampa, yeah, I was on the ground. Tampa had a nice music scene as well. Wasn't as big as Atlanta or Miami, but it was growing. And so really, connecting and making a network base in Tampa for the music scene and also still refining my skills as a producer, whatnot, working even more with the artists around and inside of the perimeter. Yeah, it really helped out in terms of like when I went to Atlanta or I went to Miami and I had to be in studio sessions and so on and so forth. It really helped me kind of already understand the ins and outs of how that should go to where I was a natural and professional already. So people would just come in and just be like, "Yo, who's this kid? Who's this person here and there?" And I was just working, like it was like unless someone talked to me, I knew that we were there because time was money. And so it was just like I'm not here to converse. I'm here to wow and make connections. And so, and when I say that, that was when I was in Atlanta and Miami when I was traveling. So Tampa was there to help me hone in and build those skills and really kind of like build the network to where when I started branching out, those people who were still in Tampa, I could call in on favors or they can call in on favors, so on and so forth. So
And how were you able to manage your music aspirations and thinking? Like I can imagine like you didn't really have like much time aside from that, and then you gotta get rest. You got you gotta get a few hours of Z's in, and then you gotta take care of you. Like, how were you able to manage all of that?
yeah, no. So um, it came to a point in 2016 to where I was like, "Hey, 2016." I'm trying to calculate ages right now. So I was mid 20s. I For the sake of the podcast, I don't have the math here at hand. It's probably better too for my own age, but 2016. I had come to the decision that I was going to do that leap. I was going to take that leap of faith. And so I put in my 2 weeks for Chase, and I had saved up a nice amount of money in terms of like being able to live off of. And yeah, and we went for, and that was actually, although it didn't end the way I wanted it to. The I ended up When I got to Atlanta, I ended up going back into the workforce. But for those 2 years, I had made so many connections. So again, I was going from Atlanta to Miami to New York to to Vegas. I was doing that music wise, and I was bouncing around, getting into sessions, trying to meet with execs, so on and so forth, to kind of like show my worth and to find whoever wanted to have a producer on their project. And that just really showed me like the amount of hustle you had to have in this industry. It was fantastic in terms of being able to travel, but the amount of work ethic that you had to have, yeah, if you weren't ready for it, it would take its toll on you very, very fast. And so I was fortunate enough because I had the savings that, and then I had family as well in Florida, that I was able to make that happen without kind of like burning through all of my reserves as quick. But I was able to get some things to happen in terms of placements and whatnot before I had moved to Atlanta. Because what had happened is that after I had started traveling for so long out there in Tampa, moving around to the different cities, I decided that I wanted to actually be in the Mecca itself, which is Atlanta. Just because of every time I had gone to Atlanta, the sessions were always, positive. I had always gotten a good reaction. The network that I had in Atlanta was the biggest. And so it just made sense in my head to pivot from Tampa to Atlanta to continue on the journey. The only downside was that is that because of the reserves being pretty much depleted, that I would have to figure out what that balance looked like again, and working corporate and also doing the music piece. But that wasn't a problem. You know, Share more on that as well once I got to Atlanta, but the pivot itself wasn't an issue at all.
Can I just give you your flowers? Because, I mean, I wasn't around for all 20 years, but I was around for a little minute, just long
Right.
enough to see, like, you actually put the work in. And I remember us going to Afro Punk, and
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
we were in
Shout
a,
out to that. What was that?
yeah,
2017?
yeah.
Yeah, shout out to that. That was such a I thank you for that too, because I know Afro Punk itself was an eye-opening experience for me in terms of like the DJing side of things and just seeing how artists who produced and whatnot, just how they did things. And I don't think I would have gone had it not been, for you, just because again, New York was it was an intimidating place. I had gone to New York for other music things, but I had always only stayed by the studio, and I was only in the studio or the hotel. I never went and ventured outside of New York just because I was just like, I don't want to be outside like that. So I think really when I had gone with you, it was like, okay, there is more than just music out here. I really got to soak up the energy as well. And I don't think I would have done that had it not been for the Afro Punk 2017 trip. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. But yeah, what a time.
And look, I thought I was just going for a festival. I didn't know I was gonna sit there, and because, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't really want to travel around New York like that by myself. And so after like a day of me going to Afro Punk by myself, I was like, oh, how the heck am I gonna get back to where we were staying? I mean, we were staying with my cousin in Newark, New Jersey, but I think transportation wasn't really like operating like that often, or whatnot. And then this is a big city, so I'm like, how am I gonna navigate it? And Dante was like, yeah, nah, you're not about to go back by yourself. We gonna go to this music session first, you're going to sit there and you just going to chillax until I'm done. And then when I'm done, we just go back. But like that part of just seeing people make music was pretty cool. Yeah. But just like seeing you kind of like in the weeds or in the thick of it, really making those connections while we were out there. And just me seeing like your journey from, dang, I've known you for what, 10 years now?
I think it's coming up on 10, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, like just seeing you really make your dreams happen and like seeing the tangible results from that is just amazing. And people talk, but they don't do. You talk and you did. So I appreciate like just knowing you, and that gave me fuel to even make my own dreams work, for me to even go from South Carolina to Texas and try and start my own business. I did that, but I had people in mind who I could like kind of like lean on for like that energy of like, I did it. I put in the work. I made the sacrifice,
Absolutely.
and I have tangibles to prove it. Like you have tangibles to prove it. So I appreciate you. You need your flowers. I don't know where you are right now in life when it comes to music. I guess we're gonna dig into that a little deeper, because I mean that's what you said you went to Atlanta for. But just I appreciate you, and I hope that whoever listens to this, they appreciate you, because music industry is no joke. And I mean, even just trying to make goals tangible, have it like into fruition, like that takes a lot.
Hmm.
It takes a lot. But I didn't really know like who I could like model that, I guess, like that timeline of like growth after. And you're definitely in that number. You're on that list of people. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
absolutely. Okay, so we in Atlanta, ATL ho.
Right, right. Yeah. So Atlanta 2018, boy, in Atlanta, yeah, things really kicked off and then things really changed. Tell you that. Moving forward with the music side of things, still working, what was it? Atlanta 2018, I moved. So it was October 2018. So really working through some things. I was out here connecting and networking with one of my buddies who's also in the music industry. Still to this day, him and I are like this. Very good dude. Work ethic is crazy. I tell you that right now. We had been working and, we kicked off some things in terms of like networking and really pushing it into next gear. And then the thing that everybody who is a music producer, what they hope to accomplish finally happens. So I want to say February 2019, I finally, after 14 years of being in the music industry, I finally get a placement. I am able to co-produce a hit song, yeah, with a major label artist, excuse me, Jesus, Tory Lanez. So I was actually on his album, and now it's escaping me right now too. And I have the plaque in my closet, and it's crazy. But I was able to actually produce a song. It's called Kendall Jenner Music, or KJM, and that happens, my life goes crazy. Like, first and foremost, that was one of the most exciting times in my life because I finally had made it to a place to where all of my hard work had become something. And you have these goals when you're working on something that, like I'm working to make sure that, I accomplish something. I get here, I get there, and once you get there, you're just like, I can't believe I made it here. And that's how I was. I will say this though, what I failed to do is creating additional goals in mind. I was still younger than obviously what I am now, and for those 14 years, I had the one single goal of getting a placement with a major label artist. I had nothing else because my dream was to have that, because I knew that if I were to get the radio play, the money would come in, the connections would flood in, the
Yeah.
the label agreements would come in, and I would then be able to have my shot at quote unquote stardom. Now, what actually happened is I got that placement. The money did come in. The label pieces did not, because the track itself did not become a radio single, which is fine. And I do want to preface all of this by saying what I'm sharing is fine. Is all of this has already been worked through. This is going to take a turn here really quickly, but all of this has been worked through, and I'm on a new path with music that is now allowing me to chase a new journey. So before I get into that, going back to the story, so the label calls did not come in because of that. But what had happened is that I started getting bombarded with other collaborators who's like, "Hey, I want to work with you. I know that you just did this new tape, this and that," and it became overwhelming. And I did not have a mentor in music to warn me of this. I did not have anybody in music actually to warn me of what happens when you get a label deal. And what happened is that once I had gotten that, stress had amplified by 100. People didn't want to be actually around me. They wanted to use me. People didn't want to actually collaborate. They wanted to, basically make money off of me. And it had gotten to a point to where, like I had gotten so consumed with, okay, where's my next thing coming from, this and that, to where like I started losing myself and music was no longer fun. And again, they don't tell you this when you're going through this, because there's this persona that you have to have when you're in music. You see it all the time with artists. And I'm afraid this is why a lot of them, get addicted to either alcohol or drugs or whatnot, is because they're coping with things that they can't talk about. I luckily there was no drugs or alcohol or anything. There was none of that. But I was not able to cope with the fact that after accomplishing this goal, I didn't know what was next. I hadn't set goals to be like, okay, cool. Well, now that you've done this, let's get on a album or anything. I hadn't set those goals for me. And so I had started spiraling out of control and I crashed and burned. And so what happened is that I had rode the wave of that track until it dried up. And after that, I started beating myself up in terms of like my music wasn't as good as that last release. Like I felt like everything that I was releasing was subpar, so on and so forth, until 2020, I think it was COVID timeframe, when COVID had hit. I just kind of just started pulling back from music. We had fallen off the grid in terms of like not being able to talk to people, and I retreated. I was like, okay, I have to figure out how I can make things work, this and that. And I met a guy in New York by the name of Murdy Shango. He had actually found me through YouTube when I was putting music out on YouTube. And funny enough, he was like, "Yo, I really like your stuff, man. I'm working on things on this end. I'm writing. I'm looking to get a label deal, this and that, so on and so forth." And I started working with him. And slowly but surely, like he brought the fun back into music for me. Right, exactly.
Shout out to
Because there
Murdy.
was no, absolutely, shout out to him. And he actually was like, like, "Yo, like you're too dope to not be out here working on things. Like your last release is your last release, and we're always working on our next release." And watching him and his work ethic, and then also being able to work alongside him, really had fired me up again for music. And it was great. It was fantastic. Now, what had happened is in the corporate space, I was also progressing. So I started getting promotions, this and that, and work became more and more and more. And unlike in Tampa, when I had taken that leap, I was not able to do that here in Atlanta. And so ultimately what happened is that the work became too much, and I couldn't balance both work and music. And so unfortunately I had shelved music in lieu of working because the bills had to be paid, the lights had to stay on. And it was unfortunate because my guy Murdy, he was working as a musician full time. And so while he understood that, he was just like, you could do it. You could absolutely do it. But Murdy was based in New York. Murdy knew about the hustle. Murdy knew about that. You got to get it. Every day is a new day to hustle. I was not, kind of like, I was not prepped for that. And again, in the earlier story, when I moved to Florida, New York, particularly in Manhattan, was one of those locations to be in. And I didn't take that. And so I didn't understand the grasp of like, hey, New York is a different beast in terms of getting it out the mud. Like New York is very expensive, so on and so forth. And I didn't understand that. So me being like, hey, I don't have the opportunity, I don't have the funds saved up, this and that. Murdy, on the other hand, was like, hey, it will come. If you jump, it will come. You just have to jump. And I didn't do it. And so unfortunately, I had taken a pause on music to continue to build up my career in the tech space. And what I say what I mean when I say taking a break is that I no longer was working on artist projects. I was just creating just production for commercials and things of that nature, and working more so on the entrepreneurial side of things to get me out of the corporate space to dive back into the creative space that I had known and loved. So yeah, I had taken a pause on that up until April of this year when a series of unfortunate events in my work life had pushed me to taking a leap again. And so I quit working my tech job in April of 2024. And since then I've been just on my own, just figuring out what this looks like entrepreneur wise. Again, I've had money saved, it's been money set aside. I've been blessed as well to also have other capital that I've been able to pull from as needed, and been able to kind of like sit down and really just focus in on the entrepreneurial things, because again, that is the goal number one, to get the entrepreneurial side of things up and running before hopping back into music with the new ideas that I have, because music is going to forever be a part of me, and music is calling me every day. There's everything that I still work on tracks here and there, and music is just like, hey, Dante, when you coming back? And it's like, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. Give me a few more months. I'm almost there. And I can't wait to come back online and really start sharing the gift again, because I feel like that. And people have told me, like, yo, you have the gift and it's selfish of you to not share it. And I finally hit a place where it's like, you know what? You're right. It is selfish of me to not share it. And so I'm looking forward to here very soon, I would say in the next 6 months or so, loosely, to being able to jump back into it and really start sharing music again. So, but that was very long winded, very, very, very up and down time here in Atlanta for these past few years when I jumped
Yeah.
in to now. So, but yeah, music has been life. It's always going to be life. And, I love it. I can't run away from it.
I'm actually very happy that you your job. I mean, I know what it's like when you know like where your heart is, like what really makes you happiest and what is like gonna be more of like a part of you and what really like brings out that little kid inside of you. And it's hard when you're trying to figure out, okay, how am I gonna keep lights on and achieve this dream at the same time? It's just, but you're in a unique place where you have the reserves right now. You're in that hustle and bustle city where music is life, like Lily in Atlanta. You got a lot of great artists that came out of Atlanta. So now the difference between Tampa and Atlanta is, Atlanta is where it's at with the music still to this day.
Absolutely.
It's where it's at, and you're in a unique place where you have time to focus and you have the reserves to focus on what it is that you love most. Yay. Okay, so I didn't look. I wasn't expecting that because I saw you in what January. Yeah, it was January.
I think it was January, yeah. And we were actually talking about another venture that I had been, I kind of just started up, so on and so forth. But yeah, I think it was January that we had connected when you had come out to Atlanta.
Yeah,
But from January to April, yeah, things had kind of just spiraled at work,
I was not
and it
expecting you
was
to
just,
tell me
yeah, it
that.
was, yeah, it was like one after another. It was just like, this is one thing, this is another thing, this is one thing. And I hit a place to where it's just like, hey, y'all are going to continue walking all over me if I don't do or say something. And so I said something and it was met with nothing, you know? And I was just like, I see. I'm not respected here. It's time for me to go. And there's no love lost. I don't have any animosity towards anybody who I worked with. Fantastic group of individuals. It's just business wise, I just had seen where I was and I was not a fan of being in that predicament. And so, and knowing how I am mentally, I knew that it would come out eventually in either my work ethic at work or I would have said something that would have gotten me, in a bad place. And so, just being the bigger person, just like, hey, we're out here, see you later.
Peace. Okay. All right. Dang, you just threw me a monkey wrench. I was not
Yeah.
expecting you to say that. Okay. So I was not expecting you to. Okay, so how are you exactly addressing the roadblock that you have been faced with now? The roadblock with you leaving April. I
Mhm.
see it's what,
It's
September
September.
now.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what's
like
that?
how's your mental health, and like I'm just like, now this is friend mode. I'm not even thinking about this podcast at this point. Like how are you?
Yeah, no, 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 no. And I appreciate you asking about that. So I'm in a fantastic place. I will say this, the separation was very much needed. I was in a place, and I had just recently discovered this. I was in a place to where I had continued to give my gifts to others instead of using them for my own good and using them for my own journey. And you always hear people say, like you give the best parts of you to others and then you no longer have anything for yourself. And that was me to the T. When I had left my position in April, I was down and out. Like that first month, I was just like, I don't know if I should be doing this. Did I make a mistake? Was this something that I should have done? I was in anxiety like 90% of the month. In May, I was just like, okay, we got to figure out something. We have to do this. And my girl, she was like, you have to, you have to take a break. Like you've been on. You have to take a break. Like you cannot jump from one to another without sitting in it and really like getting your mental space back up. Because if you do not take this break, you are not going to be in a prepared space for what next is, comes for you. And I'm so appreciative of her and her saying that is because from April to I want to say the end of the end of June. So I guess Q2, as a matter of fact, Q2. I had figured out what life looked like. I had figured out what I was going to do. I had figured out, excuse me, I had figured out what my next 12 months were going to look like. And I had also developed another passion outside of music that I was really honing in on. Um, Again, there was money coming in, but it wasn't like working, it wasn't like how when you get a check on the 15th and 30th or 1st and 15th, however, or every 2 weeks. It wasn't like that. And so again, having the saved money and then the capital from other ventures and whatnot, I was able to really sit down and really look at life and say, Dante, what is it that you really want? What do you want to do this time next year? What do you want to have? Like, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? What do you want life to look like? And because of that, I was able to really get back into a place of just mental wellness, zen, I guess, in terms of just like, yo, I'm happy, I'm relieved, I'm excited, just things like that, and it's just like, okay, cool. Q3, we're on it. And Q3, we were on it. Like I was able to sit down, I focused, I started, making plans and whatnot in terms of, okay, this is what we're going to do with music. This is what we're going to do to get our health back in order and whatnot. Cause I also really got motivated, gym wise, turn it up a notch. I've been, like a gym bro for term wise for like the last, couple years or whatnot, but I've been on and off. And recently, January, like I really turned it up a notch, but it was getting in the way with work and whatnot because I would go to the gym 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m., 5 a.m. to make sure I was back at home for work at, 8 or 8:30, whatever the case is. And this was nonstop. And then after work, I was on it in terms of like the creation or the business building. And yeah, it just got to a point to where it bubbled over. And so now, July, I was able to really sit down and like, okay, this is what I want to do for the creative. This is what I want to do for the health. This is what I want to do for um, just myself. And I really was able to recharge and get into a place. So mentally, I'm probably the best I've been in a very long time. And that's so exciting for me because you talk to friends, you talk to families, and people, you can see it in their eyes. And I'm fortunate enough and I'm blessed to be able to be doing what I want to do currently, and not be locked to a time card or whatnot. I'm blessed currently to be able to do that because you can see it in people's eyes to where they're just like, I hate this job, but I have to do it. I'm so stressed out, but I have to do it. I am not having fun. I feel like my life is passing by me, all of this, but I have to do this. And that type of sadness or that type of, disdain in their eyes and whatnot and in their actions is just like, yo, I wish I could do something for you. And the mental piece of it is just like, I've been there. And so now that I've been able to like recharge myself and whatnot, it's just like, okay, when my friends call me and they're just like, hey, what's going on, this and that, I need help. Let's talk, let's talk because I was in your position, this and that. And so, yeah, mentally, I have not been this good since I was young, since I had no responsibilities, like, and this is such a great place. And now that I know how this feels, well, y'all have to pry this from my dead cold hands.
No, that's right. And in a way, this experience that you had in, I think, San Antonio when you were with Chase, I think, and you mentioned that your department
Mm.
was pretty much terminated in a sense, like
In a
they
sense, yeah.
got rid of your department. Not exactly the same experience because they did give you
Right. Right.
kind of like that initial feeling of like, will I have a job?
Hmm. Hmm.
Where am I going now? Like what's next from here? Like that initial feeling is kind of like similar to like when you left the role that you have in Atlanta a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say when it came to leaving this role here in Atlanta, it was more so like, okay, well, what's next? When I had left in Tampa, when I left Chase, I left because I knew that I was going to pursue music full time. This was my decision that I had made, and I had a very supportive leadership team, so that made it even easier. But I knew for a fact that that was my goal. I had, if it failed, I had things to fall back on in terms of that. For the Atlanta piece, I knew I needed to get out. More so like the stress, the anxiety, the pieces of me, body wise, like I felt shutting down and just the tightness and everything was because I was moving into a place and I was chasing goals and dreams that I really didn't have any intentions of really pursuing. We all have to work to keep the lights on. We get that. But I'm always a big proponent and I try to tell people work in a manner that is to your
Yeah.
whatnot. So, if you're a creative and you like music, try to go work in a radio, try to go work at a label, try to go work at somewhere to where music is a big piece like Spotify or something. If you're a person who really likes fashion or whatnot, try to get into a creative director role, things of that nature. Something to where yes, you're clocking in and out, but the goals and the network is you can utilize should you decide one day that you're like, I'm done with this. You can still utilize. And I knew for me, tech is fantastic. Tech is great. I love tech, but I am not a tech based individual first. I've always been a creative individual first. I've always been like an entrepreneur at heart. And moving up the chain in tech was pulling me away from the entrepreneurial side of things that my mental kept pulling me back to. And so essentially, what had happened is that I want to say, like for those who don't believe, I'll say the universe. But for me, God was just telling me, hey, I'm about to kick you out of this, So I hope you have everything in store. It's going to hurt. It's absolutely going to hurt. You'll be fine. You have a support group around you. I need you to keep the faith. And in doing so, you'll start developing what it is that you really wanted to do. And sure enough, when I absolutely jumped and whatnot, it hurt. It hurt bad. Them first 3 months, Q2, I was an emotional wreck. But I had to get through that to get to where I'm at now, to where my mental is A1. And it's just like, okay, you're supercharged. You look like you could take on like a CEO role type of energy. And it's just like because I needed that, I needed to push and I needed to move into a space to where my strengths were at play. So yeah, I say two different things in terms of like the Tampa and Atlanta piece, but the goal was the same. I was moving towards something I wanted to do. Back in Tampa, it was music. Atlanta, it was being financially free.
And you know what a blessing it is to have that support in Atlanta because if I'm not mistaken, Atlanta is the first city that you moved to where there's no family, right? Or did you have
What?
family
Yeah.
there
So I
too?
have very yeah. So like I have a few aunts here. So I have two
Okay.
two of my aunts are here, but yeah, I was basically here, and it was just like it was me. I could go to their house and so on and so forth, but it wasn't like no, you can't stay here. So it was basically it's like hey, you can come over if you're having a bad day, if you need a meal, this and so on and so forth. Like family members do. But it's like, nah, you can't live here. So you have to go out there and get it. So essentially, Atlanta was the first city to where it's like, hey, you're on your own. You have a little bit of support here to where if you need to lay your head somewhere for a few days, you could, but you're on your own. And so being able to hustle like I had already done in the past, moving around prior to Atlanta, had basically just given me the tools to be able to hustle to get things going for Atlanta. Because I'll tell you this, I moved to Atlanta with $600. Yeah, $600 in my car. And I was just like, yo, I talked to a few friends. We got a house. I had $600. That next week, I found a job through Craigslist. I was working for a month with that before I started the tech role. I worked the tech gig for 5 years. So here we are now. And I'm going to say this piece as well to not this isn't to be flashy, but in those 5 years, I went from making 15 an hour to six figs. And it was just like, but that was due to the hustle of Atlanta and pieces of it in terms of like prior to this. But coming into Atlanta and seeing how you have to get it or you won't survive, that was like, okay, cool. So essentially, I guess I wasn't ready for the New York hustle, but the Atlanta hustle was the next step down. And I was like, I'm ready for this. And so I was able to get to it and really build the connections and so on and so forth and make sacrifices, of course. But to get to that piece before now jumping to this next piece of life, where I'm at currently. And then I also too, I'll finish that. I'll say this. I'm no stranger to hard work. So in the events that thing don't work out and we go back down to zero, we can always build back up. And that's one thing that having that break and having the mentality, I've realized that you can always build back up, but you have to go for what it is that you want to do. You have to, because I couldn't imagine still working there as of September and being frustrated, being, just like there's more for me to do, but I'm not taking that leap. A life would probably be different. I don't know if I would be in a better headspace or I would be in a worse headspace, but I'm glad I did what I needed to do to be where I'm at now.
Okay, friend. Just yeah. That when like offline you mentioned like you learned the true meaning of hustle. And I see why now. Okay. But overall, you're in a good headspace and that's what matters most.
Absolutely.
And now you're more focused on the creative Dante.
Yes, yes. So I'm focused now on building me as a personal brand. There are a few more steps I'm doing currently, and so there are a few entrepreneurial roles that I have in here that I'm also building concurrently with the creative portion of me. But that is where I'm at now. Music is a part of that, which is why I mentioned earlier. I'm excited to be able to share with everyone here, within the next 6 months or so, what that looks like now, because I've always been a visual person. I like to make, to film. I shoot videos and whatnot as well, photos. You've seen this. And so the creative space that's in my head that is allocated to creating video concepts and whatnot, I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody and just kind of just putting that out there. Whether it hits or not, it's okay. I've gotten to a place now to where I'm okay with things not performing well, but still putting it out there because it may not reach the masses, but all it takes is one person,
Yeah.
And if it reaches one person, cool, because that one person can then share it. And then now two people know, then four, then eight, so on and so forth. And the slow burn, that's what it's all about. You build up the community slowly, and the next thing you know, you have this blossoming thing that you're just like, yo, I would have never guessed it would have been like this.
Do you have like any other like words of advice? Like you mentioned, hey, if you're good at music, but you have to like kind of go into corporate, do something in corporate that aligns with what you love or what interests you have. But do you have any other words of wisdom for people who may be in your shoes right now?
I would say this, like, we aren't getting any younger. And I hate to say that because when it comes to age, that's not a topic that people really like to talk about. Excuse me. But as we get older, like we run into the additional issue of regret or resentment, so on and so forth. And so I'll just simply say, like if there's something that you want to do, instead of trying to do all the big things, and this is also me talking to myself still because I still do this or try to do this when I'm having my bad days in pieces. Like you breadcrumb it out and you just build from there. So, you know, just like you're doing with this podcast, for example, this is a real world example. You breadcrumb it out. You've been connecting with all of your close friends and associates in terms of like, hey, I want to talk to you because your life is valuable, your life is interesting. And it's things like this. You breadcrumb it out, you build. It's not going to become 100 in one day, but just think about it. You build every day 1%, and then in 365 days, like the results are going to show itself. You're going to be much farther along than if you decided that you wanted to have all these elaborate ideas, write them down on paper, Like, I can't wait to do this. Just give me another month. I'm going to do this. And you don't act on anything. It's unfortunate, but truly, that's where I used to be. And up until recently, like that's where I was. I was just like, I don't really want to know. And then, like I was pushed out. And that's really been something for me is just like, just bits and pieces and you'll get there. Like you don't have to do the big things. The small things will turn into the big things and it's going to snowball. And so even for the folks who are working, if you have time at night when you're done with work, if you're not, gym and whatnot, all responsibility aside, if you have children, if you don't have children, if you need to get other things done, all that aside, there still should be some type of time in there. I would say dedicate 1 hour a day at the very minimum. If that's Netflix time, instead of having 2 hours, take an hour and use that hour to kind of like just push forward on something, on an ideal or something. Start building. Start just doing every little thing that you can to kind of push the needle forward, and it will become more exciting. And as it becomes more exciting, you will then start devoting more time to that, and the snowball will start getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to a place where you're just like, I think I can do this. I'm going to go for it. Because again, as I mentioned, you can always jump back into it if you fail. But would you rather do it and fail knowing you gave it your all? Or would you rather sit there on the sidelines and be like, I could have done that, but I didn't? And I feel like a lot of us are always on that every day, and I'm just saying, like, if you're listening to this, give yourself that chance to be great. The worst that can happen is that you'll be where you're at now. But the best that can happen is that you'll change your life for the best and you'll be so proud of yourself for making that difference and that change.
I got two more questions. I have a light one. I maybe
Okay.
should have asked this in the beginning, but do you like living in Atlanta at all?
You know what? That is such an interesting question, and that has come up more and more now. So I do, first and foremost, I do like living in Atlanta. I will say that because Atlanta always has something going on, and again, from my Dallas days, there was always something to do. Here in Atlanta, there is always something to do. However, Atlanta is expensive, and so I find myself not going out as much as I did when I was younger. Plus, I just like being in my house. I am a fan of being in my house. Like, like I pay on this every month. I want to enjoy my rent. You know what I'm saying? Like
All right.
I want to enjoy that. I want to get my money's worth. And so I like going out. I like living here, but there is a balance. And as I've gotten older, I tend to be inside a little more than when I was younger.
Okay. Yeah, I found that a little fascinating about myself too. Like living in Texas, like at first I was just outside, like always doing something. And then, I mean, the pandemic kind of played a role in me wanting to be inside. But then when it was time for me to make the most out of being inside because I had no choice, I actually enjoyed it. So, and then I realized I was a lot more productive when it was just me.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%.
And when you mentioned like writing, like I I have notebooks like right here, like full of just ideas of stuff. Like I'm on like my fourth notebook, just like writing down like goals and aspirations and where I see myself in like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But I did that kind of like being by myself at home. So yeah, if it wasn't for that, like I don't even know where I would be. Honestly, like people like to make fun of folks who like to stay inside, but the people who are inside, they aren't just sitting on the couch. They are working just differently from what you expect. And I love it here. I love being outside, but I just love being in my crib, just chilling and just me and my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I as well. When I'm in the house, I am able to really channel things that make sense.
Yeah.
When I'm outside, I get it as well, but in those times to where I get a bit of inspiration, or like I think of something, I will write it down in a notepad in my phone to bring it back home. But just like you, I also have notepads of ideas and whatnot written down that I have started going back to kind of develop, like, okay, cool, what can I do with this? What can I do with that? Because again, you wrote it down for a reason.
Yeah.
But I think not all of us, but I think many of us will write things down and we'll never go back to it. And what I noticed is when I went back to my books that I had notes in, it was gold in those books because it was like ideas to where you would see things, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic, especially now where we're at with like social media and things like that. If you're if you're a person who likes to be in front of the camera or whatnot, some things work out better than others. But in terms of looking back at things, you can always repurpose something that you may have written down 2, 3 years ago or a year ago, something like that, into something that makes sense now. And there's never, I want to say this lightly because someone will say there are bad ideas, which I'm sure there are. But what I was going to say is that there's not a bad idea. There's just poor execution.
Ooh.
So I think if you had those ideas in your book, and maybe at the time you didn't know how to execute it, but you come back to it maybe a year or two later, maybe you've developed life skills that you needed as a prerequisite to now execute that in a manner that makes sense. And so the thing is that, those books that you have the notes in, yeah, those are timeless to me because those are ideas to where you were in a different headspace back then. And it's kind of like a step back in time. You're just like, I remember what I was thinking about with this. I have the resources now to do this. Let's jump on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love hope folks are taking notes. Okay. One last question. You've been everywhere. You've done a lot. You've seen a lot. You experienced a lot. So I want you to just kind of take a moment to think about where you were like years ago, like the Dante that was in Texas, like San Antonio, kind of fresh out of college, trying to figure out what was next. Just think about that Dante, and like based on where you are like right now in life, what words of advice would you give to that version of yourself?
Man, I would say keep going. It's all worth it. You have to fail. You have to fail to get to where you are. And everything that you go through is a part of your story. Even if you feel like it's not part of the main story and you feel like it's filler, it's a part of the story. Don't try to take shortcuts because all it's going to do is slow you down in your path and make you take longer, but enjoy the ride. Everything that you set out to accomplish, you will and more. But you just have to believe in yourself.
And that is on Mary Had a Little Lamb. Thank you, Dante.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate this. This was such a good time. I feel like I think we were on this for it was about 90 minutes or whatnot, but it didn't feel like that at all. So, I've enjoyed myself. I appreciate this. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.